Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is a game that I hadn't even heard about until a few days before it released. I can't remember exactly where I first saw it, but the art style really jumped out at me, so I did some research. It turns out that this game serves as a prequel or companion piece to another game that's coming out in 2023 called Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. That game is an extensive turn-based JRPG, which is supposed to be a spiritual successor to the Suikoden series, whereas the game that we're talking about today is a side-scrolling action RPG. Overall, I'd say it starts off a little bit slow and the story isn't all that captivating to me personally, but even so, the gameplay was so good that I ended up spending 20 hours with the game, completing everything 100% and getting the Platinum Trophy. So as you can probably tell from that intro, I really did end up enjoying my time with the game, even though I wasn't that into the story. Why was that? Well, first let me briefly explain what the game actually is and what it's all about. Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is a side-scrolling action RPG with elements of town building and dungeon crawling. You play as CJ, a female scavenger who helps to rebuild the town of New Nevea after a massive earthquake destroyed it. The townspeople are initially reluctant to accept your assistance, but after doing some minor jobs around town, they begin to trust you and the story goes from there. There is of course much more to the story than that, but as always I won't be spoiling it here. I found the story in its entirety to be fine. It didn't really grab me as much as I'd hoped, but I don't think it's bad by any standard. It's got a lot of that dialogue where one character asks, "Do you know about this thing?" and then the other replies, "No, I don't know about that thing." Then the first one is like, "Oh, so you don't know about this thing?" And then the other one replies, "How could I possibly know about this thing?" And it kind of just goes on like that from scene to scene, and it does get a little bit grating. It's also got zero voice acting, which is something that surprised me quite a bit. I really thought it would have at least some voice acting, but I suppose this is a small game by a small team, and considering that the upcoming 100 Heroes game is an ongoing Kickstarter project, it may just have not been in the budget. Voice acting can be pretty expensive, so I guess it does make sense. Every area in the game is zoned off and split into different sections. In the town, you can either walk off the edge of the screen to enter a new area, or fast travel between any area that you visited before. When in the dungeons, you can walk from area to area as normal, but then you can fast travel between signposts, which are essentially this game's checkpoints. There's also quite a few areas that are blocked off until you acquire the right item to get past it. So in that sense, it's got a somewhat Metroidvania feeling to it as well. Later in the game, you'll get the ability to do double jumps, air dashes, and a few other things that allow you to reach places that were out of reach before. The main gameplay loop consists of you picking up main quests and side quests from the town and then venturing into the game's various dungeons to complete them. Inside the dungeons themselves, you'll be killing loads of enemies which grant XP and give you materials that you can use for upgrades. There's also a few places within each dungeon where you can find natural materials like wood from the Great Forest or gold from the quarry, for example. As your characters level up, their stats do increase slightly, but most upgrades come from purchasing stronger armor and weapons. The game doesn't actually have equipable armor or weapons though. Instead, you simply buy the better version when you can afford it, and then it gets automatically replaced. You can then improve it further by visiting the blacksmith. It's best to think of it as one consistent weapon or piece of armor that you can upgrade to a better base model, and then you can improve that base model at the blacksmith. When you buy an upgraded weapon, you don't lose any of the improvements that you made to it at the blacksmith because it's still essentially the same weapon, if all of that makes sense. The only items in the game that you can actually equip are accessories and runes. Each character can use 2 accessories and 2 runes at once. The accessories are generally things like rings or necklaces that give bonuses to you while you have them equipped, such as 10% more defense or 7% more XP, for example. The runes, however, are a little bit different. You can equip them in an attack or defense slot. So if you equip an ice rune into the attack slot, it imbues your attacks with ice, which are strong against fire enemies. However, if you equip that same rune or a copy of it into the defense slot, it will give you a damage resistance to fire. There are 4 elemental runes in the game, and those are earth, fire, lightning, and ice. These can all be mixed and matched to suit the situation, and I think it's a simple system, but it's also easy to understand and implement. Players who don't normally enjoy complicated RPG systems need not worry. Combat-wise, you'll always be fighting and moving on a 2D plane. At the start of the game, you can only control one character, but as time goes on, you'll end up with a party of 3. The interesting part is that each character is mapped to a different face button. I played this on the PlayStation 5, so I had the main character on square, the heavy hitter on triangle, and the magic user on circle. When you tap the square button, the main character CJ will attack, and that's who you'll be controlling. At any point though, you can press triangle and you'll instantly swap to the heavy hitter. The only thing that takes a little bit of getting used to with this is then continuing to press triangle to attack with him. In the beginning, I kept pressing triangle to switch to him, and then went back to pressing square to attack with him because my brain kept telling me that square was the attack button. The three main characters do actually feel different to control as well, which is something that I didn't expect. In all honesty though, it doesn't take too long to adapt to it. At first you have access to a basic 2-hit combo, but before long you'll end up with a launcher attack, air combos, juggles and more, so the combat does get deeper the further you progress. In fact, you can actually juggle an enemy once you've defeated them a limited number of times in order to get a slight bonus to the XP that you earn for that kill. For me, the game's whole approach to acquiring new skills works really well. Instead of, just throwing 10 combos at you from the start of the game actually gets you used to one thing and then introduces something new at a very tight and consistent pace. It just felt like I was always organically getting better, and I think that's a good feeling in a game like this, because if you feel like nothing's happening, you might start to lose interest. I should also mention that there is a link attack system where you press another character's attack button just after another attack has landed. It allows you to slow down time and swap between the characters quickly for good damage. It's also worth noting that the amount of link attacks you can perform in a row does increase as you progress, and there is a short cooldown between activations. For me, I'd say the combat and the game overall is definitely on the easy side, as I was able to beat everything on normal and hard without dying a single time. I usually like to do a lot of side quests in RPGs, and that's what I did here, but in doing so, it seems like I may have massively overpowered myself. For me, it wasn't actually an issue, as I find equal enjoyment in games with lots of challenge and zero challenge, and basically everything in between. So I guess if you're specifically looking for a challenge, this game simply will not provide that to you. The hard mode doesn't even unlock until you've beat the story on normal, which should take you around 11 or 12 hours, so do keep that in mind. The town, as I said earlier, needs your help to rebuild it. Relatively quickly, you'll gain access to a lot of different areas within the boundaries of the town, each with their own services, vendors, or places of interest. The stores all look very basic and run down and only offer a small selection in the beginning, but by completing side quests for the owners and collecting materials, you can help to improve the store both visually and in terms of what they offer. Fulfilling the requests of the townspeople and upgrading the buildings gave me what I can only describe as a pleasant sense of visual progression, and it's actually something that I wish Pokemon Legends Arceus would have done more of. Speaking of the visuals, I played this on a PS5 and I think it looks really good. It's not the most impressive or photorealistic game ever made, obviously, but for my tastes, it's a really pretty looking thing. At first glance, I thought the game was actually one of those HD 2D games, like Octopath Traveler, things like that. But no, it's actually more of a 2.5D game as far as I can tell. All of the major parts of the scenery and the backgrounds and the foregrounds actually are modeled in 3D, while every single character and monster in the game is a high-resolution 2D sprite. It's subjective, of course, but this look and the HD 2D look is something that I am really starting to like. In my opinion, Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is a great little game. It's short-lived, but I found it to be fundamentally enjoyable to play. It's also very hard to argue with its very reasonable price of £12 in the UK and $15 in the US. It's a very pretty game with satisfying combat and progression that always makes you feel like you're achieving something. The story wasn't very interesting to me personally, but perhaps I'll appreciate it more when I play the 100 Heroes game in 2023 and link it all together. Ultimately, if you're looking for a casual RPG that's nice to look at, plays well and won't break the bank, this is absolutely worth playing in my opinion. On the other hand, if you're looking for a challenge, something a little bit more difficult, I'd say look elsewhere. Generally speaking, to me, this feels, looks and plays like a companion game that a huge studio would put out to promote an upcoming release. However, it's been made by a pretty small studio, and as far as I'm concerned, they've done a brilliant job on this, and I cannot wait to see what they do with 100 Heroes in 2023. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.